So in the past few weeks, we have been talking about power, oppression, discrimination. And I think indirectly, we have been talking about intersectionality already. Last week during the class, at the beginning of the class, I asked you to talk about your intersecting identities. And you even already wrote a poem about who you are. So we have already been talking about intersectionality, but during today's class, we're gonna be talking about it more specifically, more in depth, what intersectionality is and why it matters in social work, and how can we apply intersectionality in our social work profession. So what is intersectionality? So according to Crenshaw, and I will talk about Crenshaw, who coined the definition or the term intersectionality. It's a metaphor for the way multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage compound themselves to create obstacles for a person or group of people. So as we see in the wheel of power or privilege here, as we get closer to the center of the wheel, someone has more privilege or more power because their identities conform more to the large mainstream society. But as we get towards the outside of the wheel and the different areas, people experience more oppression because of their intersecting identities. So we see here in the middle that someone who is English speaking, higher socioeconomic status, owns property, in terms of body size is slim, is heterosexual, able-bodied, has a post-secondary education, is white, is a US citizen, is identifies as cisgender, is English speaking, they would have more power or more privilege. And in contrast, again, someone who has the opposite in those identities, they would experience more oppression, and especially if they have, again, more of those intersecting identities in which they experience oppression. Those intersecting identities or inequalities would compound themselves, again, as the definition says, creating even more obstacles. So here the definition is further explained. Again, it is a term that was coined by Crenshaw to explain, and when she created it to explain the differences of Black women in the legal system compared to white women and men, because there was a case where an African-American woman, she filed a lawsuit against a company that didn't hire her, and she filed a lawsuit against them because of discrimination. But the judge favored and they favored the company's case or position that the African-American woman who filed the lawsuit, that she didn't experience discrimination the judge made a case that the company, in fact, had African-American men working for the company and also women, but they were white women working for the company. So the judge failed to see the intersecting identities because the African-American men working for the company, they were working primarily in inside the factory and the operations unit, and the white women, they were serving more in administrative roles in the company. So the woman, she was in fact facing discrimination because she was neither a white female, or she wasn't, and even though other Black men were working there, there were no African-American women. So she developed this term to show how the legal system had failed to see how together being African-American and female had created together this barrier for her to be hired to work for this company. So again, it is a lens to understand how an individual's identities are intertwined and how each identity has different levels of power and privilege in our society. And the person is shaped by the totality of this power. And also the interdependence of the identity interacts with different systems of structures and power. And these systems and structures of power help to create and perpetuate oppression of marginalized groups. And last time at the beginning of the class, I asked you, can you describe your identities? And many of you described who you are. As some of you mentioned, oh, I'm Hispanic, I'm a woman, I'm a mother. So those are the identities, and they don't influence us individually, but they influence us in their totality together. They shape who we are and how we experience how we experience oppression, or how maybe we also experience privilege. So this is another direct quote from Crenshaw. She says, it is a lens, a prism for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other. So let's take a look at this video. Please let me know if you are able to hear the sound of the video. Oh.
Intersectionality.
You hear
Have you heard this word before?
Yeah.
Even if you have, you might not know what it means. Let's take a look at it. The first part's easy enough. Intersection, a place where things come together. Intersectionality refers to the reality that we all have multiple identities that intersect to make us who we are. It also gives us a way to talk about oppressions and privileges that overlap and reinforce each other. This term dates back to the 1980s and legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. She noticed that we didn't have an effective way to talk about how the experiences of Black women are different from the experiences of Black men and of white women. How? Black women endure both gender discrimination and racial discrimination. Over the last 30 years, scholars, educators, and activists have expanded the use of the word intersectionality to talk about identities beyond race and gender. Let's look at a few examples. Jerry has a disability, and his family lives below the poverty line. He is the oldest of 10, which requires him to do a lot of caregiving and sometimes keeps him out of school. No one in the school counseling office has talked to Jerry or his parents about his plans for after graduation. He has applied for several jobs, but never gets called back. Fatima is Muslim and recently came to the United States from Somalia. She finds that many people at her school make assumptions about her values and abilities before they speak to her. Many of her classmates think she shouldn't be at their school at all. Greta comes from an affluent family. Both her parents and grandparents went to college, and her father owns a successful business. She doesn't think about her identity very often, but she does think of herself as someone who will go to college and get a good job once she graduates. Think about Greta's situation as opposed to Fatima's or Jerry's. Fatima and Jerry are members of marginalized groups. They don't get to choose whether or not to think about their identities. Greta, on the other hand, can ignore intersectionality if she wants to. Life isn't the same for everyone, even for people who share identity characteristics. By adopting an intersectional lens, we have a better opportunity to understand why and to change the institutions that help and harm us based on who we are. Want to learn more? Read our story, Teaching at the Intersections, in the summer 2016 issue of Teaching Tolerance magazine. Intersectionality.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go to the next slide and then I'm gonna come back to the previous slide because this one is connected to the video. So let's take a look at this wheel of power that we already looked at in the first slide as well. So as we take a look at this wheel of power, can you think about your intersectional identities? How do you experience both privilege and oppression? So let's take just a pause here and think about, look at the wheel and look at your intersecting identities. And reflect on how these intersecting identities shape who you are and how you experience both privilege and oppression. And then I'm gonna ask you in a minute. So I'll give you a minute to reflect. Okay, so does someone want to volunteer to share? Maria Jose?
Yeah, so for me, what I'm saying is that there's a lot of things that I don't think about in a daily basis that like other people worry about, you know, like there's even my like citizenship status, like just because I'm a US citizen, like there's things that I don't have to worry about. Like I don't have to worry about how I'm going to be able to get a job coming into the US. I don't have to worry about being discriminated. If someone sees my driver's license, they're gonna see that it's like a normal one, you know, like it's not a work permit or it's not a special form of ID. So what I'm getting out of this is that in a way, it's my privilege to not have to worry about those things and not have to think about them.
Thank you so much, Maria Jose. I really appreciate it. So what I'm gonna do is now is that I'm gonna give you a few minutes now. I'm gonna put you in small groups. So I'm gonna give you maybe around 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes to talk about your intersecting identities when with other group members, so that you feel that there's a smaller group and you feel more comfortable discussing. So maybe with just like Maria Jose did, maybe you can discuss um, particular aspects of your identity that that stand out to you, either in how you experience privilege or oppression. So I'm gonna put you in groups randomly. So let me go ahead and do that. And please take a few minutes to discuss what stands out to you from this wheel, and how you experience both privilege and oppression, or one or the other, whatever stands out to you. Oh, hold on. All right. Okay, well, thank you so much. So maybe just a couple of people, can you share what you are taking from reflecting on your own identity? Intersecting identities, I should say.
I'll go. So one thing that we brought up was education. I can see it both as power and oppression because I'm the first one out of my mom's side and my dad's side to even earn any kind of degree. So last semester I got my associates. And like to me,
Mhm.
explaining to my kids, like that's something, you know, that I'm proud of, that I can show them, hey, you can continue going to school and you can work towards a degree and use it. But
Mhm.
then there's my family, like, you know, my parents, my grandparents, cousins are like, well, why are you going to school? What are you going to, why do you have to go to school? What are you going to do with that degree? So like, they don't understand it because they weren't able to get that education that I'm able to receive now. So I see it as both power and oppression.
So can you explain a little bit more, Amanda, like how so you feel in some ways that it causes like oppression for
Yeah,
you?
because
Mhm.
not more towards me, but like towards my family, because it's like when I have to explain to them why I'm going to school and like what I'm doing and how I was able to go to school, they don't understand because, you know, they didn't get that opportunity.
Mhm.
So it's hard to explain to them to where they understand and to where they're supportive of me
Mm,
being in
okay,
school.
okay.
But because I have like my kids with me along the way, they're able to see everything from the very first day I enrolled to the
Mhm.
day I walked across the stage last semester, to where they understand that it's possible.
Mhm. Yes. Mhm. Yeah, and it gives you more power as a person to have that education. Yes, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Someone else? Maybe just another person before we go on.
I think reflecting on this well, I don't realize how much privileges and also how much non-privileges I have as a person. Especially like being Indigenous on the will, it says that it's not a privilege, but like Katie said in our group, that we also find power within our own oppressions, if that makes sense, and our non-privileges. So like, even though Indigenous is a non-privilege to other people, in my eyes, it's like my superpower. It's like who I am, and I'm very proud to be part of that. And that also intersects with my citizenship with myself, because I didn't realize being a citizen was a privilege, but history and whatnot, I don't really see myself as an American. I identify as Native American because we were here before then and all the other history that came within, but yeah.
Mhm. Yes, thank you so much for sharing that, Frankie. I really appreciate it. And I think that's really interesting to me, and how Amanda and Frankie, how you see, like, for example, Frankie, your heritage as power, as strength, but maybe I think why this will, for example, says that race or ethnicity may be seen as lack of power or oppression, is because that's how society sees it, and also because the structures of oppression in many institutions, they give more power to those who who, for example, in the center of the wheel, they have those characteristics, who are white, who are male, who are wealthy, and that is why, and especially I would say, for example, like I said, I mentioned that I am from I'm from Mexico, but I grew up in Indiana. And I think little by little things are changing, but in positions of leadership, you see mainly white males in those positions. And as faculty members, for example, we were talking about how NMSU is a Hispanic serving institution, yet many of the top leaders, they don't reflect the student body population. So that's an example of how the power structures are kept even today, and why maybe your ethnicity or race or immigration status, for example, in the power wheel, they're on the outside, and they instead of being serving as power, their identities that may affect you and having disadvantages. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so the slide that I skipped asked, why does intersectionality matter in social work? Why is it important for us as social workers to understand intersectionality?
I think it's important to understand it because we work with, as social workers, we're going to work with all kinds of people. And, you did mention a couple of lectures ago to not assume that we know everything, So if I'm not aware of my privileges, if I'm not aware that the way that I was raised, the way that I grew up affects how I think, I am not going to be able to connect with my client in a personal level. I am going to have a limited relationship or a limited connection with them because I am not seeing things from their point of view.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Maria Jose. So yeah, that's important. And intersectionality also matters because there are a lot of disparities among different marginalized groups and different systems, including, for example, healthcare, education, the criminal system. So in all different kinds of systems, there's a lot of disparities, there's a lot of oppression. So even, for example, in the child welfare system, so there's a lot of disparities in the different systems. So in education, some may have more privilege over others in having access to education. So for example, as we think in the state of New Mexico, like which school systems have more resources, more funding. So that would be a disparity because those who live in areas, lower socioeconomic areas, those schools may have fewer resources. So that's a disparity. And the healthcare system, like who has access to health insurance, who has access to healthcare. And those who have less access, for example, during COVID, we did interviews to learn more about different barriers immigrant communities experience. So we learned that, for example, migrant workers, they experience a lot of disparities. They didn't have the proper, they were called essential workers, but yet they didn't have the proper equipment and they didn't have health insurance. So they experienced a lot of disparities there. They were forced to work. They were not eligible for the stimulus payment. They didn't have the proper equipment. And if they got COVID, they didn't have health insurance or they didn't have the resources to access health insurance. So we learn about all those, how those together, those aspects of intersectionality impacted them. And again, in other systems as well, education, health, criminal system, we learned last week, I believe, about the injustices made and the higher incarceration rates among African-American men compared to white men who committed similar or same crimes. So we need to understand those aspects of intersectionality. Okay, so that both, as Maria Jose said, at a personal level, like how maybe our identities, are we imposing our values, but then also looking at the systematic ways of oppression, we need to look about how systems are perpetuating oppression and inequality among different marginalized groups. And what can we do as social workers to advocate against those inequalities? Okay, well, thank you so much. So we're gonna take a small break right now, okay? And we can come back in 10 minutes, so 11:31.